Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to take a little walk back in time to February 1983 and issue 70 of The Dragon. This was a time The Dragon was just fantastic. I look forward to it every month. I couldn't wait to get my hands on the latest issue because, quite frankly, everything that was in here we treated as official D&D stuff. And there are lots of other articles in here too. There's usually Gamma World, Top Secret, all kinds of stuff in here. So we're going to take a look at this. We're going to go through the page by page. We're going to take a look at the ads. I enjoy doing these. I hope you guys enjoy watching them. They've proven pretty popular. So today, on page 121, issue 70 of The Dragon. All right, Dragon 70. One other quick thing. I didn't talk about subscribers in the open. If you have subscribed already, thank you. If you haven't, please do. Keep the channel growing. I'm going to have a poll on my Patreon page. It'll be free to take a look at, and I'm just interested in what kind of games people would want to see me cover going forward. Most of them will be vintage games, and they'll be ones that I have played and have access to all the materials. So please take a look and let me know your thoughts. So back to this, Dragon number 70. We get this beautiful cover. One of the more understated covers of Dragon magazine. Doesn't make it any less gorgeous. We take a look at our $3 whole in 1983, new AD&D adventure, tournament tips, and the Smith NPC. So I always loved looking at Dragon cover. And then inside we get an ad for D&D, which is always struck me as funny. I get why they do it, but it's like advertising the Super Bowl when you're watching the Super Bowl. And then we got a nice ad for Rolemaster. Rolemaster was interesting back in the day. A lot of folks loved it. I played it. I played specifically Arms Law and Spell Law. I think there was Claw Law too, under a DM at that old club we used to play at. It was interesting. It was a little complicated and slowed the game down a little bit for my tastes. So here we are, February 1983. We have the table of contents, and then we have the letter, an open letter from the editor, Kim Mohan, and then, of course, Out on a Limb, which is letters from fans. And if you have an opportunity to translate D&D into Japanese, if you're fluent in English and Japanese, you can translate. Look at that. A big opportunity for you. Escape from Vulcan's Isle, from Epic's Computer Games, Thinkers Play. At this point, in 1983, I only knew one person that had a personal computer. It was one of the guys I played with, and I had seen him play a few monster games on there and was really impressed by the idea that you could have such power right in your own basement. The Smith NPC. Test the metal of this NPC. Cute little pun there. By Ed Greenwood. Ed Greenwood always brought good stuff. He, of course, went on to write the Forgotten Realms stuff, several Elminster novels, things like that. And he gave us an interesting NPC. And I remember trying this guy out, but honestly, there wasn't enough call to really do much anything with this guy. So it was a good article. I read it, and I got a few ideas out of it, specifically for my Dwarven characters, mine and ones at my table. The Hull Truth About Speed. Larger ships make faster frigates. This is by Bruce Every, with some nice artwork right there. And sailing ships in D&D. Always problematic in the old days. There are better rules for it now. And there's certainly beautiful 3D models for it and things like that. But back in the day, there really wasn't much of anything. So dealing with shipborne adventures was a little tricky. We just drew the outline of a ship on a piece of paper, and that was our ship. And we put the lead figures around it, and then it was just fun. Didn't do a ton of ship-going adventures for that reason. Plus, players are notoriously paranoid about drowning. And I guess it's not paranoia if it's something that really can happen. So just look at what you missed in Nexus, the gaming connection. Nexus was a magazine from Task Force Games. Not really one I remember. I remember seeing it on the stands, but not one I really bought. And then we get Gary Gygax, Social Status and Birth Tables, new for AD&D Play. And this is the From the Sorcerer's Scroll article. Gary had kind of a semi-regular column. And this was all stuff that was basically official AD&D. We didn't adapt any of this stuff really until it came out in Unearthed Arcana in 1985. Then we started playing around with it a little bit. It's never been much of a driver in our campaign. A cast of realistic characters. by Frank Metzer. Build role-playing possibilities on social structure. So this is kind of a companion to this piece, how the social status and birth tables can actually lead to role-playing. Falling Damage by Frank Metzer. This was the falling damage, the last word in falling damage until the publication of the Wilderness Survival Guide and the Dungeoneer Survival Guide. That gave us better falling damage, but this was a pretty useful article. We used this quite a bit. I actually had a Xerox copy of this. Yes, a Xerox copy of this guy that I carried around with my DM stuff. Giants Can Be Awful or Awful by Roger Moore. Roger Moore always wrote a good article. Ways to make giants more interesting, not just bags of hit points that need to be put down. And then, of course, a great ad for the Traveler book. Traveler was just coming out of the era of the little black books, the pamphlet-sized things, and they were growing and wanted to be magazine-sized books, and this was one of their first forays into it. I have the Traveler book. I got to take a look at that on the channel. So here we go, continuing. Giants Can Be Awful or Awful, and this goes to the Giants in the Earth. This was a series of articles in Past Dragons, and it tells who the giants were and what issue they appeared in. Then we get Game Masters Hobbies Incorporated out of San Francisco. A nice ad for adventure game specialists, so you can buy some stuff from them. You could send away for it. A catalog was only $2. And then New Fantasy Orcs, New Fantasy Orc Tribes from Citadel Miniatures. I always gotta like Citadel back in the early 80s. I miss going lead figure shopping, as we used to call it. Partha Panzers, Breakthrough to Victory with Rel Partha's new self-propelled Mark I Dwarf Steam Cannon. I never did much anything with steam vehicles or any kind of guns or anything in D&D. It was never really my way. Early we had a few guns. Some other DMs had given out that kind of came around into my campaign. And of course, we'd S3. We were all running around with blasters and lasers. And they were fun, but they took away from D&D, and I eliminated them pretty quickly from my campaign. And then we have an ad for Interstellar Wars and New Wave Tactics. Interstellar War, Deep Space, 2 Massive Armadas, Probe for Weakness. New from Hobby Game Distributors in Chicago, Illinois. Don't remember doing anything with them. Chicago had quite a few game companies. Deities and Demigods, The World of Greyhawk. I took a look at these guys a couple of months ago on my channel, Bo Cobb and Zagig, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them here. This Fiend Factory figures for Citadel Miniatures, for Canadians by Rapham. Have this guy. I think he's the only guy I do have. And then we get Star Trek, the Correspondence Games. Yes, you can play with a stranger, someone you've never met. You can connect with this individual and actually game with him. Wow, what you could do in the early 80s. Figure feature, Knights. And the text is by Kim Eastland in this. Different knight-led figures that were out there by Superior Models and Martian Metals and Citadel Miniatures. This is pretty cool because it would give you something to look for when you went to the hobby store. We didn't have any kind of previews or anything at the time. This was the preview. And then we have a nice Indiana Jones looking guy here for Grenadier Models. Grenadier provides the characters, you provide the adventures. For Call of Cthulhu. Dwarves in Space by Roger Moore. I read this article quite a bit. It's a Traveler article, but it's also kind of system agnostic, where it just, well, it's more Traveler than anything, I guess. But it talks about having barbarians in Traveler, and why not dwarves in Traveler. This one never resonated with me. I really didn't do anything with it. And here's all the tables and everything. And it was nice that he wrote this up, but we never really used it. Castles by Carol. We're at Castle 3, Jericho. And this was a regular feature for a few months in Dragon. The Second Volley, taking another shot at firearms, AD&D style, by Ed Greenwood. By this time, I had already adopted the Gary Gygax rule that gunpowder just didn't work on my Greyhawk. I did not want guns wandering around. I've never introduced them. I never will introduce them. Those are for different games. Villains and Vigilantes. This was I think the second edition. I had 1 or 2 supplements for them, but I never really played V&V. I played the original, the one from 1979. We played it a little bit in 1980 and 81, but then I found Champions in 82, and I never looked back. And then we go to Mecha. Mekika. This is a nice adventure by Gail Sanchez for characters 4th through 7th level. I remember running this one, and I put in the Amidio Jungle, I believe. I'm not positive where the original placement is, but I did run this. This is actually a pretty good adventure. I liked it. She didn't get too buried in history. We got the were-jaguar out of there, which was kind of a neat concept. This was before we had a ton of lycanthropes wandering around. Second edition and on, we got a bunch of lycanthropes in AD&D. But this is a pretty long adventure, and I did like it. And the adventure finishes up here. And true, there's more to life than just science fiction films. There's also the Fantastic Films magazine, the magazine of imaginative media. And this was out of Mount Morris, Illinois. Illinois had a lot of companies out of it that advertised in Dragon. How to make the most out of your FRP tournaments, guidelines to keeping your group going. I always liked these articles. They were kind of give you a shot in the arm. Everybody gets tired of running. Being the DM, I've been the DM of my campaign for over 40 years. I rarely play. I would say, honestly, these days I play probably less than 5%. I'm the DM or GM of everything I run. I don't mind that. I do miss playing. I haven't played Traveler except for one bad game at Gen Con in the mid 90s. I have not played Gen Con. I have not played Traveler as a player since the very early 80s. So it's been almost 40 years since I've actually been a PC in Traveler. I kind of miss being a PC now and again. And then, of course, the ever-popular ad, does your Vorpal blade go snicker snack or does it just snicker? Bandersnatch Leathers, they've got the dice bag for you. Dice bags were a big, big deal. Like collecting dice are now, dice bags were a big deal. They weren't easy to come by. We were all using Crown Royal bags for the most part. And then our article continues on about the group and keeping yourself fresh as a game master and a player. And then we got an ad for Dragon Tree Press. Cosmic Encounter, science fiction gaming at its best. Space Opera from Fantasy Games Unlimited. I always like Space Opera. That's going to be one of the games I'll put in the poll. Aftermath, Disaster Has Struck, again by Fantasy Games Unlimited. Basically their answer to Gamma World. The article continues. GM, it's an information bottleneck. He cannot function effectively if he is interrupted or distracted. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Here we have a nice ad for Judges Guild Imperial Alert aboard Darkling's ship. I like that adventure. Nice Traveler and Traveler Dice being advertised. Traveler Dice is still a thing. Berserker, Fred Saberhagen's Berserker. I liked Fred Saberhagen's writing a great deal. I liked his Berserker novels. I always lamented that there wasn't much action in them, but I read an interview with Fred Saberhagen many years later that said basically he had never been in any kind of war or fight situation, and he didn't feel he could accurately write about it if he hadn't experienced it. That's why there's not a lot of real action in his stuff, but he's great ideas in there. Berserker was one of the things we had to feel like Traveler back in the day. Cast your own fantasy figures through the Duncan Company out of Calvert, Texas. And then this article continues on, recommending having a qualified leader for dominance every time a decision, then struggling for dominance. A lot of players, a lot of games have one spokesperson. They're the only one that can really kind of interface with the DM. If you saw my live play that I put out a couple weeks ago, you saw us actually playing. That's how we play. It's by no means a leader. It's kind of like herding cats sometimes, but it's the way we prefer to do it. I've always found that to be a fun way. Ad for Rolaids, new modules from Rolaids at your hobby shop. A lot of the Rolaid stuff was very useful for AD&D. Hobby House, get a free lead figure with purchase of your $1 catalog out of Westland, Michigan. I have that guy. I think I've mentioned him before. Very long article on playing fantasy role-playing games, just finishing up. And then the Dragonbone Electronic D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20 wand. I think I saw one of those once. It was interesting. Nothing I ever had. Cabal Gaming Systems, Playing with Reality. Their invention is Mission. Fantasy is Cabal. These guys were out of Seminole, Florida. The game within a game. AD&D characters can battle over a chessboard. Who hasn't done a game where the players were on or dealing with the chessboard? I have certainly done a few. Uh, a la the first Harry Potter, where you're dealing with chess and chessmen. They can be a lot of fun. I did one years and years ago where the players were actually on the board as pieces, but they had to fight the other pieces. So if it was a queen taking a bishop, and the player character was the queen, then they would combat the bishop in AD&D. They'd get in the same square and they would literally fight. And then if whoever won the combat claimed the square. So it threw kind of a nice wrinkle into it. Unfortunately, it did slow the game down, but that was in a 6-hour game that we were doing. So that ended up being pretty good. The player characters did prevail, although I dropped one or two, but they found out that death wasn't permanent on the chessboard. It just basically shunted them to the side, and then they had to wait while everybody else continued the game. So it was kind of neat that you could have a piece attack another piece, and then the one that was attacked win and keep the square. It definitely added a new wrinkle to chess. Tim Grice wrote this article. And then we go to the convention schedule. Look at that. All these conventions coming up. Nice Thieves Guild ad there. The Cowford Dragoons and TSR Hobbies present Gen Con South 6. It's a game convention in Jacksonville, Florida. So continuing on with that, we have the standard for fantasy role-playing game masters, the Companions, in Bath, Maine. Mapping aids. Mapping aids were a big deal in the early 80s. Daredevils have adventures from Fantasy Games Unlimited, and Bushido, also Fantasy Games Unlimited, folks that brought a space opera. Champions 2, the Super Supplement. This is the Champions I started out with. It had come out in about mid-82. I loved Champions. I still love Champions. We play it a fair amount. Let's take a look here if any of these guys are still around. Games Plus, of course, is still around. That's where we held Jump Point. And Hobby Chest was around. I don't think they are anymore. I'd been there. And then Lyle's Hobby and Craft. Last time I was out in Lyle, or Westmont rather, which is next to Lyle, that was still around. Valparaiso Pet and Hobby, those would be the only other one near me. And then we have Off the Shelf, Simac, Dish, Brunner, and more. Different books for different D&D or science fiction flavor. These were always nice. I always took a look at these, and if it was a book that interested me, I made a point to pick it up next time I was in a bookstore. Yes, bookstores were a thing. Your source for a wide game of figures and games. The Tin Soldier. I remember the Tin Soldier. Wow. There's more where this came from. You can order back issues of The Dragon. I do miss the early 80s sometimes. Sometimes I feel really old when I read this stuff, but then I think back to how much fun it was to be excited about D&D at this level and look forward to Dragon every month, and I do miss that. City Book 1, Aid for All Systems, and this reviewed by Ken Rolston. I'm not familiar with City Book. And Civilization Breaks New Ground, reviewed by Tony Watson. I don't really know either of those supplements. This game's for Daredevils only. This is a review of the Daredevil game, also by Ken Rolston. And we have the Wizard's Corner, Saskatoon Fantasy Role-Playing Game Center in Canada, and Dark Horse Designs in Boise, Idaho. The ads in Dragon were almost as much fun as the articles. RPGA Network Bulletin. Yes, the RPGA. That strange thing that other people belong to. Don't know why I didn't join the RPGA. And now we are with What's New with Phil and Dixie. This is one of my favorite ones, too, where how being a gamer, it kind of jades you in real life. The guy's being mugged, and he makes fun of the guy who's mugging him, and so forth. And then, of course, Wormy. Dave Tramp here. This is a long installation of Wormy, or a long installment. And then Star Trek The Role-Playing Game by FASA. I played this a couple of times. I never owned it. I did play it a couple of times. There were some neat rules in it. I also played Starfleet Battles, never owned it, but there were some cool rules in that too. And then the back page is for Middle-earth Role-Playing System, MERPS, J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, by Iron Crown Enterprises. These were some really nice things. They were very rules-intensive, but there was still a lot of good stuff you could pull out of them. So that's it. That's a quick look at Dragon number 70, available at your favorite hobby store 40 years ago today. So I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on Dragon magazine, and if you miss as much as I do. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.